There's three fairly well-known psychiatrists that maybe you've heard of their names that came out of Europe slightly before World War II or right in that time frame. Sigmund Freud. Anybody know this name? They all came up with theories of what we as humans need the most, what it is that drives us, what it is that we use to overcome the challenges of life. Sigmund Freud, his whole concept was pleasure. I mean, when you encounter despair or difficulty, what you seek is pleasure, and that can come about in different ways. I'll address those in a bit. Adler was another one. Adler thought, no, it's not pleasure that we need. In fact, he says, we all, we grow up as children, and we're weak, and we don't have ability to choose our own things. Independence, he says, we all seek and strive for power. That's what we need to be the best that we can be. That's what we need to move us forward in life. However, there's a third psychiatrist who came out of Europe, but was not as lucky to get out of Europe before World War II. And he ended up in a concentration camp. And his experience in this concentration camp was to watch all of the people that normally would seek pleasure being denied any form of pleasure or joy or happiness or even just basic human needs. He watched people who would normally be very strong and powerful, people who would overcome everything with their physical or mental force, and he watched them be deprived of any ability to have any sense of power. He watched both of them experience despair and their own inferiority, and he said that he saw even some of the strongest people give up on the inside and die. But he said he saw another group of people who were filled with hope, some who just endured, who made it through, but it was because they had something else on the inside, and he said it was a hope. He said he saw those people having hope for meaning, hope for purpose, something that was more than their current situation of despair and inferiority and meaninglessness. Now, whether you agree or not, you can probably look around at some of your friends, your coworkers, and you can say, oh yeah, I know that's how they get through life. That's how they get through their difficulties or their challenges. That person seeks pleasure. They're seeking power. They're overcoming their despair, overcoming their inferiority. That's what they're doing. Now, let me give you an example. When you have a really bad day at work, how many of you go on a shopping spree? Not going to confess it, are you? How many of you go to the chocolate box and pull out the chocolates? How many of you seek pleasure in one way or another? It's like, okay, that's going to fill that void of brokenness right now. Let's go to the example of power. You get to work and somebody's having a really bad day. Maybe they're your boss. Have you ever seen somebody take it out on their inferiors? Maybe they put their thumb down. They say, oh, I'm in a bad mood. I'm going to take it out on you. I mean, they may not actually say that, but you've felt that. These are people who are basically doing what Freud and Adler said, seeking, to overcome their life meaning based upon pleasure and power. But the truth is, there's something more, something that can offer more than either of those. And Frankl saw it. It was hope. Now we come to this passage in Isaiah, and by the way, I doubt you've heard this passage read, maybe ever, let alone during Advent. But there's some particular points that I want to address in here. First of all, let's understand Isaiah is the son of Amos, a prophet, but he's prophesying to this kingdom at this time that they're divided. They're already split in two. They've got the northern kingdom who's basically living in slavery. They've been conquered. The southern kingdom that's in threat and danger by the Assyrians. In 722, the northern kingdom had been broken off. The southern kingdom was doubting and struggling, and they're even thinking, God, are you even there? I mean, God, really, I think you're kind of beating up on us so much, we don't really think you're going to get us through this one. And so they're starting to worship other gods. And Isaiah is preaching to the people. He's condemning them and saying, don't do that. Don't fall away to other idols. And he's pointing them back to God and said, have hope. In fact, Isaiah's words in here says, please look, O God, we are your people. Have you ever just felt like things were bad and you just want to cry out to God, hey, God, look, I'm still down here. I'm one of your children, one of your sheep. Did you forget me? That's kind of what's happening. What Isaiah is pointing out. How do we have hope? How do you have hope in the midst of meaninglessness or despair or depression or inferiority? How do we get through those times? What does true hope look like? Maybe even when we feel like God is behind a veil. God is distant in the heavens, or there's this wall. Maybe we've even constructed a wall between us and God, and we're not letting God through. We feel like he's distant and non-caring, and we have to endure the suffering, the loneliness, and the pain all on our own. In fact, before I go any further, I want you to just take a moment right here, and you're probably already pondering. But I want you to think, what is it in your life or your context right now that just feels like despair or brokenness, meaninglessness, inferiority, like worthlessness? What is it you're struggling with that just feels like is pushing you down like a heavy burden, or that is that wall that's keeping you from God? Now I want you to ask yourself, what is your first tendency? What's that thing that you turn to that helps you overcome it? Do you seek pleasure, whether it's chocolates or other? Do you seek power? Or do you just long with a hope that God has meaning and purpose for you? Isaiah's answer is hope. And Isaiah's answer is a very powerful hope. And in fact, I chose this passage for a reason. It begins with this section that I think is so powerful and relates directly to what happens at the birth of Jesus. Because it begins by saying, oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. That's what Isaiah is crying out for. In the midst of all of their despair, he says, God, come on down to earth. I mean, it's not like The Price is Right. Come on down, you're the next contestant. It's like crying out, God, rend the heavens. Now, who knows what rend means? To rend something. Shout it. To tear something. Okay, but I want to clarify. This rend it's kara in the Hebrew, and it means not just to tear. It's not a gentle, how quietly can I do this kind of thing. It is like a violent kind of ripping, tearing. In fact, the word actually relates to cleave, like take out a cleaver and chunk of meat and chop that thing in half. It is a violent kind of action. Isaiah says, rend the heavens and come down. Rend the heavens and come into our presence. And by the way, when you encounter difficulty or despair, depression in life, does it ever feel like it's just an easy thing to get through? It's just a piece of paper and I can push it aside and I can walk through it and have a good day tomorrow, right? No, it's not that easy to get through the difficult times in life. In fact, it's often like beating your head against a brick wall, right? Isaiah knew what he was talking about when he said, God, I need you to rend the heavens. I need you to tear apart this barrier between us and you. And if we're honest, we know in our own lives when we've got a barrier up, when we're facing difficulty or struggle, we know we need God to enter our life almost in a violent way that rips open the barriers. To rend, it means He's asking for God to enter our presence, to break the walls of our despair and inferiority and meaninglessness. I said the word in Hebrew is kara, and it means to cleave. But in the Greek, when we get to the New Testament, it is schizo. How many of you, can you guess the word schizo? To divide, right? The church, by the way, in history, East and West has had a schism, and then the Catholic and the Protestant church is schismed again. It's to divide. And often they're a violent division. They're very uncomfortable, and there's wars and challenges in division. By the way, God doesn't want that in the church. We're one church, one body, one faith, one Lord, one baptism. But there's a couple points in the New Testament that if you missed these, you missed what God was really doing when God sent his Son into our presence, born in a manger. Because in Mark chapter 1, we hear this word again that's related to what Isaiah asked him to do when he says, "Come, rend the heavens and come down." And in Mark chapter 1, when Jesus is being baptized by John, and the Holy Spirit comes down in the shape of a dove, and it says that the heavens are rent open, and God speaks to all of the people there. It says, "This is my Son, with whom I am well pleased." Wow. Okay, that's fulfillment. If you want to talk about prophecy fulfillment, when Isaiah is crying out to God, "Come down, rend the heavens and come down." Then literally in the New Testament, it says that he rent the heavens open and said, "By the way, here's my Son." I don't know about you, but to me that's powerful. And he didn't end there, by the way. The story continues, because Jesus didn't come just to be born in a manger. It goes to the cross, doesn't it? And we know what happened on the cross. We know Jesus died. But if we read in Mark chapter 15, when Jesus died on the cross, at that very moment that he died on the cross, guess what happened in the temple? In the temple, there's this barrier that's been there to keep the people out of the place that is holy, the place of God's presence. And it's this big veil that is across that space to keep people out. And as soon as Jesus died, guess what happened to that veil? Same word. It schismed. It was rent. It was torn. It was violently split, saying no longer is there division between God and man. No longer is there something keeping us separated, because I have come down into your presence to destroy, to wipe away despair and meaningless and inferiority and brokenness. I've come down to bring hope. You know, we talk about Christmas, and we think about Christmas as this gentle baby Jesus, and it's this meek and mild baby Jesus, but God comes down in a very real, very powerful, very violent way. And he comes to fulfill even the prophecy, the calling out of Isaiah, when he asked God to rend the heavens and to come down. See, Christmas hope, it's not about the presents, it's not about the trees, it's not about the Christmas cookies, although they're good. It's about God choosing to rend the heavens and come down to be with us. It's about a hope that perseveres in the good and the bad days. It's about a hope that does not leave God hidden from us or with a barrier between us. It's about a hope that teaches us to persevere. In fact, you know what? Let me put this in perspective. Because, you know, we often think that we are the only Christians, that have ever been here. This goes back a ways. Let's go back to 361. 361 AD is the first recorded sermon that was a Christmas message, and it was preached. It was preached by Opetus in Milev, and this was during the reign of Julian, who was the emperor of Rome, and there was a lot of persecution. Christians were being killed, and this was a bad scenario. People were in despair, and they were afraid for their lives, and they weren't sure what God was doing to let all of this happen, all of this evil happen in the world. And guess what scripture text he used to preach on? He preached on the killing of all of the innocents, all of the boy children under age of 2. Remember when Jesus escaped with Mary and Joseph to Egypt because of that? He used that text because he says, look, the situation is bad, and look, this is horrible, and this is evil and atrocities, and yet God sent us his Son that gives us hope for escape. Hope is what God brings us. I'm going to just continue with the ancient history version, because in the year 400, guess what? There's another sermon preached. This was by Asterius, and this is the bishop, and he was preaching about holiday gift giving in the year 400. You know, we think today things are out of control, and I think they are, but this is what he said. What should we call this feast? Well, it isn't really a feast at all. There's no friendship behind these presents. Everyone wants to get presents. Those who give them, they're often ill-tempered, and those who receive them, they pass them on to more prominent people. This so-called festival causes nothing but debts and grief. Children learn to beg and grovel for presents. He says, those who can, just get out of town. Maybe that's why we started traveling for Christmas, going to the in-laws. See, they understood that even early on, that the perspective of Christmas was getting out of line. That somewhere along the way, things had gotten askewed, and our hope had been put in other things like presents and gift giving. But hope, true hope at Christmas, isn't about those things. It's about having hope in the divine, who's willing to break open the heavens for us, who's willing to die, to rend himself on the cross to put away the barrier of our own sin and death. God was not born in a manger for a small purpose. He was not born there for his own pleasure or for our power. He was born there to bring hope and purpose. This kind of hope, which is found only in Jesus Christ, is a hope that is not broken. It's a hope that's not hidden and distant, but it's present and real. It's a hope that is powerful, and it's a hope that's life-changing. So let me close by challenging you with this thought. Whatever it was that you thought about earlier, whatever barrier or despair or brokenness, meaninglessness that you've been feeling in your life, that's that barrier between you and God, have you been brave enough to ask God to come and rend that barrier? And if you haven't, then my question is, do you really want to get past it? Because if we're not asking God to come and rip open that barrier and invite God to come down and into our own space, then are we just comfortable hiding behind it? And we can't blame God, because God has already done it, and he's willing to do it again and again for us. So I would challenge you, whatever it is that you named before, I invite you to start praying in a different way. Say, God, come and rend this barrier in my life. Come down and be fully present. That's a prayer that will offer you hope. That's a prayer that will give you the strength to persevere. And to me, that's what Christmas is all about.